Creepy Batman.
Hello my friends and welcome to this, the 15th episode of Scary True Tales with I, Creepy Battenberg. Henges are found the length and breadth of the British Isles, the most famous of course being Stonehenge. Henges are associated with mystical powers, especially so one in the English county of Wiltshire, which we will hear about in tonight's first story. In our second story, we go somewhere where death is commonplace, but are those who have died ready to move on? I had travelled to the UK with my girlfriend to meet her mom and family, a daunting experience even at my age. It was the first time I had actually stopped in the UK. My previous visits consisted of stopovers at Heathrow Airport on my way to someplace else. We had visited her eldest daughter who was attending uni in Brighton and then travelled to Somerset to see her mum. We had passed Stonehenge on the way there and I had seen it from the highway, but we didn't stop. After a week or two in a small village near Yeovil, we were heading back to Brighton. I am an early riser, getting up at 5 AM daily, but my girlfriend gets up around 11 AM. By the time we got organised to leave, it was late afternoon. She asked me if I was interested in stopping at Stonehenge, and I agreed. She seemed determined to show me all of the UK in the 4 or 5 weeks that we were going to be there, though mostly it was through the window of her SUV. When we arrived at Stonehenge, it was swarming with tourists. There was a large metal mesh fence around the stones, and the little parking area across the road was full of huge tourist buses. We were both disappointed, and she asked me if I would be interested in another place that had some stones, though she wasn't sure on the name. I told her I was, although I thought that Stonehenge was a one-off. We drove north across the Salisbury Plain and arrived after dark at where I was later to learn was Avebury. We parked at the Red Lion Inn, though a sign said the parking area was for the use of patrons of Avebury. Please bear in mind that at this point I had no prior knowledge of ley lines, or that there were so many different henges. Anyway, we entered a field through a small gate and proceeded to walk towards 3 large stones we could see in the distance. As we got closer, I noticed what I thought was a small mist beside one of the stones. I commented that it looked like a druid priest, and got my girlfriend to take a photo, which because of the darkness came out as a blob. As we got closer, I realised that the mist was not changing shape and still continued to look like a druid. He was standing to the right of a large stone watching us as we got closer. When we got about 15 feet away, he simply disappeared. I used to be an investigator working for the federal government, so naturally I immediately went to where he had been standing, examining the ground around it and looking in the distance with my flashlight to see if I could figure out what it was. There were no footprints or disturbed areas, and we were the only 2 people in the entire area. It was late, and what I refer to as country black, with very little light pollution, no sounds except the very occasional car off in the far distance. I suggested we simply stand quietly and see if there were any sounds at all. We stood, holding hands, looking at the stars, and about 10 minutes into it, she turned to me and said, "Pardon?" She had heard someone speaking into her right ear on the side I was standing, and she thought it had been me. It hadn't. We then wandered over to a line of small stones that came up to about my shoulders. We stood facing them with the Red Lion and some small houses off to our right in the distance. The area behind us appeared to be a farmer's field and was large and flat. While we stood there, a car pulled up in the distance and its headlights cast our shadows on the row of small stones. The car then turned to the right and we were in darkness again. A few minutes later, a second car came and we could see our distinctive shadows on the stones before it too turned to the right and we were in the pitch black darkness again. When the third car came, we once again saw our shadows, but along with them was a procession of people that appeared to be moving behind us from left to right. They seemed to be holding farming tools, a bit like scythes and hoes. I did an about turn and could see nothing except the empty field with the car in the far distance. Nothing for light to be reacting with to cause the shadows. Now my ex-girlfriend is a trained scientist. She has a master's degree in engineering and a partial doctorate, but she was beginning to panic, and had I not been holding her hand tightly, she would have been gone. From the 3rd to the 7th car the same thing happened. with the procession appearing to be about 5 feet behind us. They didn't make a sound. Although I told her that I didn't sense any danger to us by the 7th car, she was pulling too hard, so we had to leave the area. We went into the Red Lion and had a pint, but she never wanted to discuss that which had happened again. Even with all that was happening, I felt quite quiet, relaxed and comfortable. My training could account for part of it, but I also had a sense that I had been there before. I'm hoping that one day I can go back to Avebury to see if anything would happen a second time. I'm a nurse who used to work in a hospice. You would hear a lot of stories of ill people seeing their dead relatives just before they took a turn for the worse and passed away. I myself had quite a few strange things happen to me whilst I worked there, mostly on night shift. One night a patient buzzed me, so I went to see what the problem was. He said that there was a lady in a green jumper who was keeping him awake. I reassured him that I would make sure he wasn't disturbed again, although admit I was bemused. We didn't have any visitors that night, and discussions with my colleagues didn't help to clear it up at all. Perhaps he was hallucinating due to the pain relief medication he was on. Later that night, at the opposite end of the building, an old lady complained also of a woman in a green coat. From that day forward, many of the patients reported the same thing, or at the very least gave a similar description of someone wearing green. I never ever came across a woman wearing a green coat, so I found this very odd. Like I say, most of these things would happen on night shift. I was doing my rounds and had had a rather busy night. Having had one job after the other to do, I was walking very briskly around the corridors, shining my torch to make sure I didn't bump into anything or trip over. I shone my torch into the room of a new patient we had in. There, standing over her bed, I saw the figure of a man who had died in that room only weeks before. Owing to my momentum, I sped past the door, only stopping after I had passed the room. I turned back around, and the figure was nowhere to be seen. It was definitely him that I saw though. It even had the gentleman's stooped posture. On another such night shift, I was doing some observations during the early hours of the morning. I was observing a lady whom did not have very long to live at all, when I felt someone poke me on the back. I turned, thinking one of my colleagues was trying to get my attention. I was greatly surprised to see that no one was there. It was 3 in the morning and I was tired, and could have easily imagined it. That's the way I reasoned with myself anyway, until I felt a second poke, a little harder this time. Again I turned, but no one was present. My hair automatically stood on end and a shiver ran down my back. I made quick work of my obs and was relieved to leave the room. Although that was a little unsettling, I never felt tremendously frightened by anything I saw or heard, but one thing that happened this one night made me feel like I was in a supernatural horror movie. There was a certain restroom that all of my fellow staff seemed to avoid. I always found it strange how they would go out of their way to use a different one. I figured I wasn't going to be so stupid as to go to another area of the building to relieve myself, and I used this one. It had the feel of a school restroom, with a block of 4 cubicles and sinks running along the wall opposite them. I sat down onto the toilet seat and was interrupted mid-floor by the light switch being flicked off. The room was bathed in darkness for a split second before the green safety light came on. I sat listening, but after the sound of the light switch, it was silent. I opened the door of my cubicle very slowly and quickly washed my hands in the sink, being careful not to look in the mirror for fear of seeing something frightening. I dried my hands and ran out of the restroom, and I never used it again. Probably the best evidence I had that the place was haunted was when myself and 3 other nursing staff heard a door slam shut on a vacant room. We all just looked at each other before resuming work. I think we just accepted it was all part and parcel of working where we did. Hi everyone, it's Uncle Creepy here. Please let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments below, and if you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching.